Of all the things that you have done, this is almost like a desert island question. You know where I'm going.
No, go ahead.
Well, of all the things, whether it's what you did for King Lear,
yes,
the magic flute,
yes,
all the things you have done, has one had more meaning to you, regardless of its success, regardless of its approval,
mm-hmm.
but more meaning for you and the life that you have?
No, I must say, I mean, I'm very grateful always if something goes well, particularly for all those people who are working on this. But success and praise and all that means nothing. What means something isn't in the past. Each adventure is different. And it's like for you, I am convinced that each time you speak to someone, it is the actual life of the present that means something. So, King Lear, I mean, I've just read him writing a book about Shakespeare, and I'm referring a lot to King Lear in it. That is the job of writing a book. But in fact, King Lear, as far as I'm concerned, I don't look back on it. I look back with deep tenderness to Paul Scofield and Irene Worth.
Yes.
But that's nothing to do with the adventure today, which is, at this moment, the suit and the revival, which we're doing in a couple of months' time, of the magic flute.
So you just said to me, I'm always thinking about the future and what I'm working on now.
Yes.
Without looking back to get some satisfaction.
No, I'm thinking about the present, what is happening now.
What I'm doing today.
For me, the only satisfaction of working in the theatre and in the cinema is the moment when it is actually unfolding, and in the theatre, with an audience. And for me, I can say, and this, thank God, has happened a couple of times in the last few days in the suit, when an audience, you're part of the audience. You've gone in, you sit down, and you're with them. And suddenly, the silence within the audience suddenly becomes that other silence when you feel that people are touched. And at that moment, I share it, and that's what makes everything worthwhile.
You can feel that they're touched by what they have seen and heard on stage.
Yes, by that mysterious thing of the silence suddenly becoming more acute. And I wrote a book that's been a short book called Between Two Silences about the theatre, which is about the fact that there is the ordinary silence, which is deadly, leaden. It's the silence on the low end. But that same thing, covered with the same world, takes you to another silence in which you feel life itself buzzing there.
What is the book you're writing about Shakespeare?
It's a book of... It started a year ago. For Shakespeare's birthday, I wrote a little pamphlet to make, I hope, to demolish forever the myth that somebody else could have written Shakespeare. So I wrote this to make fun of it, to pull the theory to pieces, to give good, strong, practical reasons of how it just only could occur to people who have never been into a rehearsal in their lives, and that anyone like Shakespeare had spent 20 years of his life with groups of actors as an actor, manager, writer, and that nobody ever in his time, where there was many malicious enemies and rivals as there are today, none of them smelt a rat and said, what's this guy pretending to be the author? We can see that he isn't capable of writing a single line. Anyway, make that with a lot of fun and demolish it. And it was published as a farewell to Michael Boyd, whose last Shakespeare birthday it was, and it was distributed to the audience. And then out of that, I began to think, but that makes me think of, and then it made me come back to the first performance of Romeo and Juliet that I saw in Verona, and then that led to King Lear, and then in the end it comes all the way through to The Tempest, going through a central passage called the Hourglass, which is about verse speaking, and the hourglass is really the image of how the difference between theatre and everyday is that every tiny moment counts. Every day we waste 9/10 of our lives. And you have that all the time. You can't let a simple short interview go on beyond the point when you know people can be listening, and that is the hourglass, which is central to the book.
Why does the idea that somebody had to have written Shakespeare have such continuance? Is it?
They say that there are by now 50 claimants.
Right.
And what set me off, I'll tell you, a year ago, I was working with someone, an actor, an Italian actor, and he said, look, I want to give you this as a present. And it was a little booklet coming from Sicily. And in Sicily, and this is the latest of all the claimants, someone in Sicily had discovered that there was a family from there that, because of the Inquisition, had moved to London just around the time when Shakespeare was writing. And that family, this is all, that family in Italian were called, their family name was Crollo Lancia. Crollo is to shake, crollare, and a lancia is a spear. So from that they said, here's this family called in Italian Shakespeare. So they began from that to try to find a justification. It's as crazy as that. But that became their obsession. We, the Crollo Lancias, are Shakespeare's descendants. And you know how for centuries nobody really questioned this until a little lady in Boston called Delia Bacon woke up one morning, looked at herself in the glass and said, and what if my great-great-great-great-great-grandfather wrote Shakespeare? Yeah. And she started trying to prove it. And what makes it work is the same principle of good criminal lawyers. Once you're given a brief, you try to find every bit of evidence
to make it believable.
To make it believable. And that's what's going on now with these 50 poor, wretched claimants.
How do you explain Shakespeare? I once did a television program called Why Shakespeare?
No, I think it's very simple. If there is all this enormous world recognition of Shakespeare, if you know that Al Pacino made this movie where he walked across the street on...
Is it called Searching for Richard? Or
yes, and he was
Richard III.
He was crossing the street here in New York with a camera following him. He stopped some guy walking and said, Shakespeare, what's that mean to you? Man, very simple guy said, to be or not to be. Now, if this could happen on this scale, one thing that we do agree on, this man is exceptional. He is unique. The moment you come to someone who is unique, you can't get away from this old word genius. That means that he's out of all categories. So then it's useless to try to explain him away. Obviously, as a genius, and then one can see there are other cases in music and painting and writing, Leonardo to begin with, he had an exceptional talent for noticing, seeing, and remembering.
The power of observation.
And the power of memory.
In memory.
Now, for that, all this idiotic and shameful thing goes on of how could an uneducated man, peasant from the country, write what you need to be from the court, to be a gentleman, to have higher education, to do this. I mean, this is the most scandalous, snobbish attitude. Because if he's a genius, and this is very interesting in relation to Leonardo, who everyone admires, is a great, was from some Italian village, and I think fairly poor man, and let's recognize Jesus Christ didn't come from the top level of people that make cardinals.
Yeah.
He was a simple man, but unique. So if he's unique, then all the rest falls into place.
Yeah, genius can come from simplicity.
Yeah, and
the commonplace.
This extraordinary capacity, which I think that he could collect in a few weeks even, of listening, watching, and getting enough impressions to write a great play.
I've always wanted to know why you were obsessed by minimalism in theater.
I never have been. And I try to say this to dissuade any young director
who believes you are.
Who believes this and believes that you're there. This is an end product. I started with a love of trying out everything, and in life and in the theater, excess. And I plunged into excess and then tried to do it as best I could, but I used every known scenic, musical, staging device known. And as I tried that over the years, but it's a long, long process. My God, you know, I came to Broadway, I did musicals. I mean, always avoided the snobbery of categorizing, and nobody said to me, your way, your theory is simplicity. I gradually found, just practically, that the human being is richer than the greatest stage effects that exist. So gradually, I began to see, well, we don't need that. We don't need that. And as you saw just now on the screen, in this we're down to a few colored chairs, which in fact it was my collaborator who conceived and designed. But in fact, you have to have, I'm afraid, a young director is unwise if he doesn't live through the same experience and by trial and error discover what today, in relation to what he's doing, is better if it's simpler. But you have to discover that to love it and believe in it. If it's an idea, then if somebody follows me, then it'll become something puritanical. That's what you should do. Be simple. And then, of course, the life's no longer there.
That is, in fact, the premise of this television program.
Yeah. Yeah. There we are.
Yeah.
But you have come to this through all the countless things that you have explored for yourself.
Right.
And so it becomes the Charlie Rose way, and it can't be imitated. What can be imitated is your searching, your determination, your listening, your focusing, your preparation. That's for somebody else to follow as a model, but not the end result.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, it's right about everything. I mean, you can't, you know, they say imitation is the sincerest form of flattery, but in a sense it is imitation.
It is imitation.
You know, it may be flattering, but it's imitation.
Look, in my own field, this poor guy, Stanislavski, who's just had a centenary in Moscow. Nobody realizes that there were about, 40 years of trial and error from him before he could formulate this as theories. And all over the world, in all these drama schools, they say, this is a guidebook. We pick this up and we do it. And if they haven't had all that background of living experience, it becomes what we call theoretical.
Yeah. I mean, it's a journey to get to a place.
Yeah.
You don't just arrive.
Yeah.
Anything that you wanted to do that you found insurmountable? That you tried, that you believed, and then you've had to say, I cannot translate this?
I would say that continually. That is why I've found that sometimes you can do something at lightning speed and amazingly. Under that pressure, something comes out of it. But sometimes one has to go on doing things again and again and again, and sometimes abandon them. Sometimes leave them
and come back
to summer and come back. And so that process is very close to.
Ben Kingsley tells of a great moment in which he was acting for you, and you walked out and you said to him, "It's too suburban." Remember that?
No, I don't.
You don't remember that?
No.
No. And it changed his acting, though. You know, I think because here's what I took from it: that you were basically saying to him, you know, it's not the best you can do.
Yeah.
It's too suburban.
Yes. That's why, really, on one hand, one must watch very carefully the words you use to an actor, because you can spoil something for years by the wrong word. But sometimes, like that, without thinking, if the relation is good and there's that trust and feeling, you come out. I mean, I didn't think that out and say, tomorrow I must, and I've completely forgotten this, but I'm sure it was on the spur of the moment and seemed to be the right way to say, the right language at that moment. And if I had said to him it in a more theoretical way, perhaps it wouldn't have had any effect.
Are actors a breed apart?
No.
No.
Not a bit. An actor it's a tragedy which we've lived through, particularly in the last centuries, which is making this myth of the artist, as though the artist is a breed apart.
Exactly.
And today, it's the exact opposite. There are young people who say to themselves, I am an artist. And who the hell has given you that label?
Exactly. But and it's also, every artist that I've ever known that was good, they viewed their art as labor.
As labor. It is a vehicle in life. And I put it very simply. I think that all of us discover, sooner or later, that we have one field, really just like a farmer, one field which we can cultivate and in which it becomes our own. And that's fate, that's God-given. And it's as simple as that. I would have loved to have been an orchestra conductor. And when I was 12, I stood in front of the old gramophone with a pencil in my hand and did that.
I've read that, yes.
But gradually, I discovered that I had a talent for a form in theatre where many arts that I can't do well myself, but which I have a feeling for, can come together, and then other collaborators can come and do the job. And that led me, and that became my field. Had I had the fortune to have that entirely for an instrument of music, I would have gone all the way, but I rapidly discovered, no, I can appreciate it. And as an actor, I tried once to be an actor. I'm the worst actor the world's ever seen. But I found this was my field. But
and the field was that you could direct?
No, I could collaborate.
Collaborate.
That's very different. Direct is a dreadful word. I only use, as you may have seen, I've written that directing is either authoritarian or indicating the direction, a sense of direction. I think that we're better off trying to go in that way. We may be wrong. Let's try another direction. That is directing. But what I was going to say is that for each person, your field may be in the kitchen. It may be cooking. It may be, for some people, doing very fine making of some mixing cocktails. It may be something even simpler. It may be just in taking care of small children. You discover that's your field, and that is what you can develop. And then to be jealous or envious of other people is as bad as the people in a bigger field and a more well-known field to being superior. It isn't. That's your field.
But what do the best actors have?
The best acting is, Simon Callow wrote about it in his first book beautifully, which is that fact that you try to use everything you can to do this as well as possible, but the real thing is that you have that moment in performance when suddenly you're free and it's flowing and it's happening and you're no longer trying to control, show, do anything. It is going through you. And that is like a miniature of what is the ideal moment in life, when there's no longer any question. You are part of life.
But then the question is, how do you find that moment?
It finds you. If
you really
your work
think so?
is, oh yes, if your work is honest and humble and detailed, and particularly detailed, I think that is why I'm talking about the hourglass. It's the sense of every detail counting, and then if you become obsessed with it, you're making a barrier. But seeing now, you have to be more and more and more, as you are all the time, watching and listening, and then something will come through that you can't predict. You must have that in what you're doing, whatever you think the direction you're going to take, there's a moment sometimes when something happens.
Frequently.
Yeah.
Frequently.
That's
and
the
you
same
never
for
know.
an actor.
You never know.
And that's exactly the same
there
for
is
an
no
actor.
roadmap.
No.
You know. And then it's exploring and feeling, and you go there and it comes back to you, and you go there and it comes back to you, and you go there and it comes back to you, and out of all that becomes.
And so one thing, an actor is like you and me. An actor is a human being who gradually manages to work through his hang-ups and his vanity, his exhibitionism, to work through it, to become more and more transparent, so that suddenly that can come through.
You said of Paul Scofield when he died, he was one of the first actors of consequence that I worked with, and the understanding between us was so great that we needed very little discussion. We just understood one another with a look or one or two words.
Well, that's the essence of what we've just been saying. Essence.
Yeah. But have you had that often or rarely?
Rarely.
Rarely.
I mean, always to a degree, or one couldn't work together.
Yeah.
But it's always these miracles, which is the absolute embodiment of something, and Paul was out of.
But is there not there's no road not taken in your life?
No.
No. That you might have gone but didn't, in the words of Robert Frost.
No, I would
have. To him.
If it hadn't been for the financial difficulties of movie making, that movies are more expensive and need more support, I would have made many more films.
You would have?
Oh, yes.
Because you loved it as an art form?
Because I loved it. So, yes, I loved the form of film as much as theatre. I've seen in my life, more films with pleasure than theatre events.
Really?
But, I mean, both are complementary.
You've seen more films in your life than theatre?
That have deeply touched me. And more, remarkable events in the cinema than in the theatre.
Are movies and theatre today exercising the amount of power they should to provide a link with the great issues of our time?
Television does that. And once television is doing that, I think we see that where minority was considered elitist and something that snobbish, that one shouldn't go along with, today it's on the contrary. Because these are very concentrated forms for a relative number of people, small number of people, something that brings even a drop of something more positive into the world is worthwhile. That's all. It's just... Paul Scofield said that, in fact, in Tell Me Lies, where in the middle of the Vietnam War, he read in public a poem and then was asked by one of the characters, do you think that this can help? And he said, I believe every drop counts. And I think that's how we must look at it, that if there's quality of thought, quality of feeling, and that emerges for a few hundred people even, for them, that's not wasted. And I do have this thing, which is always very moving, of people who tell me that they were in a very, very bad life's condition. One was going to an operation here in New York. The next day he came to see the Conference of the Birds, and he said it helped him to go through this surgery the next day. And you hear that 15 years later, and you think, yes, that's what it's all about.
Thank you for coming.
Yeah.
It's always great to see you.
Good.
Peter Brook, The Suit is at the Brooklyn Academy of Music. It runs from January 17th until February 2nd. Peter Brook, thank you.
Thank you, Charlie.
Thank you for joining us. See you next time.